That's a good call out though, because there's a definite, call it tone or attitude, maybe a theme is a better term in the industry of there's an expression that I've used before, I think here, but I've definitely talked about on LinkedIn. It's the idea of art versus science, and that being in partnerships, a lot of folks get into this idea of it's all art, man. I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna brush stroke and I'm gonna shift the paint and I'm gonna make it look like. And I think the challenge is that when you think that way, when you focus on it being such a free flowing role and free flowing way of doing business, you start to break away from the ideology that you actually could build a science in here, be more programmatic, systematic, and frame in something that is a bit more predictable. Now, I won't argue the point whether it is or is not capable, like you can or cannot build something that is absolutely repeatable every time. I do think there's some art to the way that we engage, secondary business compared to our own, certainly. But that ultimately, the more context you have and the more ability that you perhaps capitalize on to take your best people and consolidate and capture and build a narrative. And to your point, go out to the market and listen to folks that are doing this and have done this and able to bring that in as well. The more effective you are at going to market with your partners consistently, and then to your earlier point, effectively scaling the teams, the roles that really drive the outcomes you're looking for within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about the art versus science. I think there's a healthy dose of both required to really be a top-notch business professional. Like there's, I come from a scientific background, very formulaic, very prescriptive, very regimented. And so what was really nice about entering the business world is I was able to introduce this art component where sometimes I'm just winging it, right? Sometimes I just have a feeling. Maybe it's a high stakes negotiation. Maybe I'm presenting and I'm speaking off the cuff. So I do like that element of it. But to your point, I think when I look at the modern partner manager, and this comes from experience having managed a number of them, is there's a little bit too much flexibility and creative license afforded to them right away. And now you can certainly earn that, the right to really dictate what you do from a scope of activities perspective. But in mentoring and talking to so many partner managers, it blows my mind. If you ask them, it's like, hey, like, what do you do on the run of a week? Right. And it's the scope of what they just a bunch of stuff. So I my personal opinion is over the next couple of years, you're going to see the partner manager type role become more akin to an account executive type role, where it's a much tighter constraint in terms of what their scope is. And it becomes much more formulaic, right? It's like you need to be taking 5-6 meetings a day with your partner's reps in order to add this much pipeline, to close this much pipeline. So I think we're trending in that direction.
All right. So as we bring in more of the science and as we get more focused on the outcome, the work that we're trying to achieve repeatably, scalable, repeatable, like doing something with a bit more of a machine attitude, let's shift to training. How do you then take this documented content and these step-by-step guides and the way that you're thinking about going to market consistently? How do you transfer that knowledge, and how do you enable the folks that are receiving it to be effective consistently, to scale their peers, all the things that come with training? So I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on how, taking what we just talked about here in terms of capturing knowledge and then leaning into some sort of a training methodology, you can really do this thing more effectively.
Yeah, really important question. Something I'm certainly passionate about, coming from an educational background. So I think first and foremost, you need to have robust growth tracks in place. Early stage companies, I get that you're just flying by the seat of your pants and it's hard to stop and be like, you know what, forget trying to pay rent this month. We're just going to build this beautiful growth track model for all employees. Like, obviously that's not feasible, but as you scale, certainly you need to have these growth tracks. And what's great about that, aside from giving confidence and boosting morale for your employees because they actually have an understanding of what they're building towards, it allows you to pinpoint key areas of growth for each individual on your team. So we would have clear promotional tracks, maybe 10 to 12 different competency areas: public speaking, engagement, documentation, data, informed decision-making. And, I would evaluate them, they would evaluate themselves, and we would usually commit to no more than 2 areas for a given quarter to focus on. And we would say, okay, the objective is to develop in this area. The key thing is pinpointing what evidence would confirm that you have achieved growth in that area. And this is something that I see far too often, is like, there's no guardrails, there's no end goal in mind of like what growth looks like. So it's very arbitrary most times. So it's like, one thing we would like to set it for on the product side is you need to be able to give a flawless demo of the integrations that you manage. And to demonstrate that, you need to create videos that you're ultimately going to be sharing with your partner reps, right? And get feedback on it. So things of that nature. So growth tracks are really helpful because it, by design, forces you to understand what the most important growth areas are for your team. But more generally speaking, what I always thought of was, what key areas are my reps going to just naturally develop in through the day-to-day, right? Like, it's going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be on calls by themselves. They're going to be speaking publicly by themselves. It's going to really suck for them in the beginning, but they're just going to develop naturally. I'm not going to focus my attention there. Where are their blind spots? Where are they not going to receive training in key areas? Let me focus the bare minimum time I have to build some training programs around those concepts. And so one in particular, as a good example, is data-informed decision-making, right? It's like, looking beyond just top of funnel numbers, like, oh, how many deals have I added this month? Where's my quota at? It's like, no, like, what are the underlying advanced metrics that really give me a good understanding of which way the wind is going in terms of my quota? And so I would spend a lot of time showing them dashboards I'm looking at and helping them understand the metrics that I obsess over, and they were able to get comfortable in it as well. So that's one approach I would take.
God, so good. For those of you that can't see me, I'm smiling ear to ear because this is my language. Like, I spent a bunch of my career early on, even at HubSpot, in this path. And the idea of core competencies, these focused areas, first and foremost, is vital. I want to reinforce that for those of you listening. If you're not training your team and you're not training them to specific, not just KPIs, but ideologies, like you talked about, this data-driven mindset, or, figure it out factor, which is the entrepreneurial component of this, or these things that are anchored in not just theory, but true application, something you can measure, understand, and metric around. First off, you're doing it wrong. Second of all, if you're listening to Chris, you should call him because he can probably help you figure it out. The second part, though, I think that's important is the understanding of what I would describe as probably the most challenging, I think, for early leaders in any profession, let alone partnerships where you tend to have a bit more ambiguity. And that's the idea of being specific and intentional around filling the gaps, like you described, looking for the components of the day-to-day job where you can drive meaningful impact that lifts the business, helps the person get better customer experience, all those different things, and not spending your time on the soft skills, the little things, like the standardized components of being a person in business right now. That stuff, I mean, I guess theoretically or in an ideal state, they should bring to the job. And so I'd imagine, the thing that I would take away from that most importantly is to look for those components in your interview process, and that your interview process should incorporate the core frameworks of what it takes to be successful in a job as the foundational questions that you ask, so that when that rep joins the team and they become your PM or whatever that role is, now you as a training lead, or even just the person who's delivering this training in general, whatever your role is, that you can focus on not those things, right? And focus really on the hard components of how to run a mutual action plan, or how to spend time on, KPIs that are directly correlated to the success of your program and of your partners yourself. This is fantastic. I feel like you and I could do this for hours. We're getting close to the end of the time though. So anything else you want to leave the listener with in terms of an operating model or some of your learnings? This has been really insightful today.
Yeah. I mean, I love everything you just said. And I would say that in terms of, I love what you said about not focusing on those areas that are naturally going to develop. One thing that I like to do when I was interviewing is I would typically have candidates complete like a screening questionnaire form, and they had to self-evaluate themselves in key competency areas, right? And people were pretty honest in many cases, and this wasn't to disqualify them. It was just me to understand them better as a candidate. So for the successful candidates who did come on board, we were able to set a plan right away. It's like, okay, you're strong in these areas. I trust you. That's great. You're saying you're not super strong in these areas. That's great. We'll set you up with this. And what I would like to do is typically I would pair people. So I would like give them a mentor who's been at the company already, whether they're on my team or someone else's team. I was like, hey, they're strong in data analysis. You're not. I'm going to match you with them. That's and great. You're saying you're strong in mutual action plan, project management. I'm going to pair you with someone who's not. Right. And this was a really nice system that we had running. So yeah, just that's just one piece. It's just really understanding where are these gaps, find people who can help them. If it's not yourself, that's okay. Just find people on your team. And the last thing I'll say is, and this is something I heard from our CEO, is like, look, certainly as you climb the ladder, you're just going to get less and less help from your manager. At some point, you're basically going to get peanuts in the way of like mentorship from your manager. They're there for like strategic decision making, but not necessarily there to mentor you. So you need to outsource that as much as you can, right? So like my CEO, for instance, he's like, I have a mentor for like 6 different situations, right? If I'm like, scared about, customer churn, I have a mentor I can go talk to about that, right? If I'm worried about our burn rate, I have a mentor for burn rate, right? So as you climb and as you have a more complex, convoluted role, you should ideally have someone in your Rolodex that you can call up for any given situation. And that's where I'm trying to get to as a leader. And certainly that's how I mentor my team. It's like, look, internally, that's where you want to start. But certainly you want to tap into your network, tap into communities like Partnership Leaders, and find people who can help you really in any given use case.
That's brilliant. Build your village is my core takeaway there. I love that. Man, I want to keep going with you, but we're at time. This has been great, Chris. I appreciate the insight, super helpful, tactical. If folks want to get in touch and find you online, where do they go? How do they reach out?
Yeah, you can search me up, Chris Lavoie, Lave as in Victor, OIE on LinkedIn. And then, you can just shoot me a DM. Happy to chat anytime.
Brilliant. All right. You guys heard it here. Go DM him. He's got some great knowledge to drop. Guests like you are absolutely invaluable. Thank you for joining the show again. Folks, go ahead and like, subscribe, comment, obviously on Apple, as I always say, and follow us on YouTube. Appreciate checking another episode out of Outcomes. And again, Chris, thanks for joining. It's been fantastic.